What's up, fellow gamers? Phreak here, and there was a micro patch that came out today for 12.5. This means it should be, I think, about 2 weeks, maybe a bit more before 12.6 comes out. So this is the balance patch we're going to be on for quite a while. There are a pretty large number of changes, although they were pretty small in scope. As with micro patches, you don't tend to localize much. It's all number changes. So let's get into the quick sort of hotfix style balance updates for this patch. All right, first things first, this is going to be a patch that affects pro play, and so Aphelios is, of course, on the list. Bot lane meta right now is very much Aphelios, Jinx, Aphelios, Jinx, Aphelios, Jinx. Jinx is number one, Aphelios is number two. And there's a couple of other AD carry buffs to kind of round that out. So first up is Aphelios, who is losing 2 armor and 20 health. You can actually zoom in just a bit more. There we go. All right. So losing 2 armor and losing 20 health. Here's the durability difference as a result of that one. So this basically is the health before and after. And then here's basically how much health he has before and after. In this context, this is how much magic damage he can take before dying, before and after the changes. So okay stuff there. And then here's the number of armor he has, which multiplied against his new health is how much physical damage he can take before dying. So 4 to 1% becomes 5 to 2%. 2 armor is not that gigantic, but it does of course matter. And so yeah, a moderate durability decrease, mostly skewed toward the early game. Pro play tends to be early game skewed, so as they keep siphoning off Aphelios' early game, that goes down. It's actually worth noting that I think if they had changed Aphelios' guns from green red at level 1, he'd probably be a lot less good early game. It would be a lot more bullyable. But because he has really, really high level 1 attack range, he actually wins a lot of level 1 lanes. And then if you do poke him back, well, he has an 8 sustain. So it's this weird situation where if you're good at using the guns and really good at auto attacking, pros get past the very weak first 3 levels, about 3 levels, via good gun management, and I think it's kind of interesting. Anyway, it's just that's what's happening with him. Anyway, more early game focused nerfs. I will say 26 armor is not absurdly low for an AD carry. This is actually still relatively high. Still, 510 health is definitely on the lower side, but keep in mind that everyone buys a Doran's Blade, or, well, a lot of people buy a Doran's Blade, so, really it's 610 became 590. Still, compared to other AD carries, it's still lower, but, Aphelios isn't actually that squishy, compared to, say, a Nami or something, right? Okay. Or, especially someone like a Sona or something. Anyway, let's move on to the next one, which is a small buff to Ashe. Ashe is getting, generally speaking, a cheaper W cost, as well as a lower R cooldown for almost the entire game. So here is W cost before and after. Sure, your first couple of volleys are a bit more expensive, but even if you wait till level 4 to rank up the ability, okay, fine. It's going to cost you 5 more mana for your first maybe 2 volleys, and then you're going to get a cheaper cost with the time, and it's going to go pretty well for you. This further lowers her need or want to go for a Mana Mooney or Essence Reaver. Not that everyone goes for it, but you're even more incentivized to be like, no, we're just definitely going for, Kraken Slayer Hurricane. We're going to skip going for mana. You maybe skip Mana Flow Band. You maybe skip Presence of Mind. Little things like that can certainly matter, but this gives Ashe pretty good amount of mid laning phase power. Which I think is pretty solid. And then also, after buffing the arrow move speed or projectile speed a few patches ago, now a much lower cooldown on the arrow, 80 at rank 1 is pretty spammy. This is the kind of change that is gonna turn heads, I feel like. People are gonna be like, these are actually pretty meaningful buffs where the W cost is really quite low, the cooldown's already quite low. And an 80-second arrow cooldown is really, really short. This is the kind of thing where I'm really expecting some pickup on Ashe, and I think we'll see quite a bit of her. I do like Ashe overall as a champion. I think she's in this really cool spot where she provides utility, but also actually provides pretty good team fight damage. She has an attack steroid on Q. She has 600 attack range. Right, she keeps a target slowed, so a set or something can certainly ult toward her, and that can be really dangerous. Where set ults, then flash stuns in a W, and if you don't flash, you're dead. Those combos still exist for sure. A Zed or a Syndra can still do stuff, but she has pretty good damage uptime, and I think is a pretty fun champion. And again, I think these buffs are pretty meaningful, so that should do quite a bit for her. Next on the AD carry buff list is going to be Draven. Just a pretty simple change, +2 AD. It doesn't mean a whole ton. As best I can recall, Draven's Q damage is a bonus AD ratio, not a base AD ratio. That got changed a few years ago, honestly. I think it's still bonus AD. So it won't affect his Q damage anything more than just the base 2 damage here. but obviously he's very auto attack based. This basically can be used for basically everything actually on the kit. I believe the E and the R are also bonus AD, so again, those spells aren't doing any more damage, but all of his auto attacks are doing 2 more damage, so, moderate buff here, definitely early game focus, of course, as well. Will buff his lane bullying, his ability to get an early kill, and the snowball, and so Draven probably in a better spot than before. Of course, he's a better spot than before, but this feels pretty meaningful. Next up is Jinx. Pretty simple stuff. Again, it's micropatch, so they're all pretty small changes, but Jinx's rocket costs are a bit higher until max rank, and her bonus rocket range is going down until max rank. This should actually do quite a lot, I think, to affect her pro presence. I think I don't expect it to kill Jinx, but this is certainly really, really, really pro-targeted, where, again, the better you are at abusing attack range differences. Sure, 725 at max level is still going to be really meaningful, but keep in mind that I think what really brought her into the pro meta in the first place was the flat 25 range on rockets, which meant that she had instead of 600, 625 level 1 attack range. And 625 is like kind of unanswerable. And certainly 725 is very good in team fights overall, so yeah, sure, it's good there too, but the difference of plus 25 range I think means more at 600 than it does at 700. So this buffed her landing phase a ton. Obviously getting lower mana costs on rockets early game helped her early game a ton. My understanding in general, by the way, so Jinx's win rate curve is actually very high on the early game and eventually falls off. It's not that Jinx can't be a good late game team fighter, because of course she can. She has 725 range or a bunch of attack speed or whatever. Like, of course she'd be a good late game team fighter. But I think people really get the idea of Jinx's scaling twisted. Like, she's a good scaffolding for gold. Like, that's true. But, like, she can never do the kind of damage of red-white Jinx. Or, sorry, red-white Aphelios, right? She can never do the kind of damage of, honestly, a, like, free-hitting W on perfect pull-through Xayah. Like, a lot of AD carries, I would say most AD carries actually out DPS her in team fights. And they out DPS her without needing as much gold, because Aphelios does so much damage, he can do it while down half an item. Xayah just actually has good spells, and so can do a lot of damage even when down an item, or just down according to the enemy AD carry. Jinx's base damages are kind of trash. Like, the rocket's not too bad, and Zap is like pretty mediocre, right? And Chomper's like, who cares what Chomper's deal? So she actually only has auto attacks. So if Jinx is ever behind the curve, she's not even a champion. She throws in auto attacks and no one cares because she's a 2-item AD carry against a 3-item Darius or Set or Xin Zhao or whatever. No one cares, right? And so if Jinx is ahead, yeah, she has 725 attack range and like you close out the game, but like most AD carries still close out the game from ahead, so like who cares? And that's kind of the thing, right? Is that's why I say that Jinx is actually early game skewed, because she doesn't do anything substantial from behind. She just rolls over and dies because she can't actually surprise anyone or make any big plays or do anything to actually push her team over the edge. And that means that, well, if you're not ahead, you've lost the game. She's an early game champion, right? That's a quintessential early game champion. If you're not ahead, you've lost the game. That's just kind of true with Jinx. Anyway, like I said, she is an early game skewed champion. The win rate data supports this as well. And not just the analysis, but the win rate data supports this as well. And so, yes, she's an early game champion. And lo and behold, right, having the fact that her early game bullying is going down, her early game, both for mana cost and range, is going to be pretty meaningful. She'll, keep up by 9, but, the first 8 levels, she had to play the landing phase out, and it's going to be a weaker landing phase, so that will affect her. I think this is actually pretty meaningful nerf. 4 mana per auto definitely does matter. Jinx pretty reliably can run out of mana in the early game. If you're using rockets for wave clear to shove waves fast, you're using it for trades, like this will add up. Next up is a pretty cool buff to Lucian. So Lucian, of course, is really scary, and it's really difficult to buff him in a clean way. I like what they eventually chose here, because Lucian solo lane is always a scary thing, because Lucian solo lane has never been as good as Lucian bot lane and solo queue, and yet has at many times been the only thing pros play Lucian for. So for solo queue, it's always been bot Lucian, and for pro play, it's often only been mid Lucian. Obviously, the mini Rurik, where you have the passive vigilance buff to really sort of ham-fist it into, hey, but when your teammates do stuff, you get more powerful, because, hey, I think bot lane Lucian players should be allowed to play bot lane Lucian and not get squashed by pro play. I think it was a good change. But the other thing to point out is that Lucian is really, 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 really early game skewed. Lucian is an incredible lane bully who doesn't scale too well, because that's just kind of how his growth curve works, right? Like, after you max Q, what's worth getting points into? W? Meh. E. I mean, the cooldown's nice, but like R ranks. That's all that's left, right? And because Lucian is a low attack range AD carry, it could be hard to team fight with the other stuff that scales, which is here's my bonus AD, here's my bonus attack speed, here's my crit chance, and it's like, well, but your attack range starts with 5, so good luck with that one. And so unsurprisingly, Lucian's right. If Lucian is a powerful champion, it's in the landing phase. So I like this. Like, can they find ways to make his late game still good? Like, can they find ways to buff his late game, maybe in ways that are unique to Lucian, without making him care more about levels so much that, well, he's a solo laner, right? Like, imagine they buff him only by bumping his ult rank up, by adding more and more damage to his W rank up, by adding bonus damage to his E rank up, by giving a bunch of bonus AD scaling, health scaling, armor scaling, MR scaling, attack speed scaling. Those all scale by being in a solo lane, right? So they did still, of course, give him AD growth, and that's still cool. But they said, well, okay, we'll buff the scaling of the damage on your team at amp. And I think this is a really clever change, and it's really cool to see it. So here is the change on Lucian stuff. His bonus AD moves up this much. Of course, his base AD is actually quite high. 62 is, I believe, where Draven lives as well. Draven has higher AD scaling. That's fine, whatever. But Lucian scales a bit harder, of course, now, plus 10 by the end of the game. That's pretty good. And then here is the basically total damage. And this is accounting for, of course, the AD buff here. Sure, okay, plus 0 to 10 AD. But also, there's sort of a vaguely expected growth curve of bonus AD, of how much you're going to tend to buy playing a champion like this. And so, in general, yeah, this buff goes from doing plus 40 damage, I believe, on each shot to plus 73 damage, which is obviously pretty meaningful. If you're going to take a more realistic sort of like level 14 late game scenario, it's still plus 24, which is pretty good, right? Because you get 2 per buff. So pretty solid stuff there. Master Yi gets a revert on 3 of the nerfs from the micro patch. Keep in mind, Master Yi got a big suite of changes that ended up buffing him a ton. They hotfix nerfed him by lowering his base health, by lowering the E damage, and by lowering the R, by messing with the R cooldown. They also nerfed Q damage and a couple of other things. The on-hit ratio scaling, and I think the crit damage even more. So they reverted some of the hotfix nerfs because, okay, they could see the win rate. They saw how big the hotfix was, and they said, okay, well, how many of these can we ratchet back to land where we want the power level to be? So Master Yi is going to end up being in a relatively playable state. Is my expectation, and cool beans. Next up is Ryze, and for the math here, like, it's the exact same math as the previous rundown, so, well, I guess it wasn't ever in the rundown, but it doesn't really matter because they've all been reverted, so you can just ignore that it ever happened in the micro patch. It's perfect. All right, anyway, Ryze is getting more bonus AP, is getting more mana per AP, so incentivized to go build ability power on the champion, of course, right, because that's worth even more. And then the Q damage is down by a flat 5 to 25, has a higher AP ratio, and a higher mana ratio, the same mana ratio, but having the same mana ratio when you get more bonus mana per AP means it's another AP ratio, right? So AP ratio goes up here and it goes up here. And now, to be fair, I have not included this and thus this math in the table coming up soon because a little bit too complicated for me to do really reliably and like assume level breakpoints on items. This is going to be one of those where I don't actually have the scaling built in. So here's the base damage before and after. 75 to 175 becomes 70 to 150. This is a 7 to 14% damage nerf, which is pretty meaningful. Keep in mind that if for example, you built no AP at all and all you did was stack mana, there is a flat amount of more flat damage added. Like, let's say there's a magic world where this guy has 1,000 bonus mana. Well, with 1,000 bonus mana, that is going to be 30 more base damage on top. So, it's 105 becomes 100 and 205 becomes 180. The, minus 5 to 25 is still the same, but the percentage is going to be less meaningful. And it still holds this part true, which is, again, not accounting for the bonus mana ratio, which asterisk, it takes 1 to 500 AP to equalize the nerf from before with the AP ratio buff. Current Ryze builds are tank Ryze. They are not getting 500 AP. This is definitively damage down. Now, doing some kind of quick napkin math, like, hey, You know, Ryze is going to build a tier upgrade. He's going to build a mana mythic. It's going to be something to the effect of, let's call it like 1,500 bonus mana. Going to be around that much, 1,500 bonus mana. And if the only AP item you buy is an Everfrost plus like a Doran's Ring or a Dark Shield or something, you're sitting at about 100 bonus AP, right? So your 1,500 bonus mana is increased by 5%, which is, well, 1% is 15, so 75. 75 mana. I mean, 3% of 75 is like 2. So basically, a tank build is getting 2 more damage out of this buff on Overload. Now, my understanding is he has some other abilities that also have mana ratios, but again, it's not going to be gigantic. If all you're getting is, again, like, I think 35 or so, 75 mana, something like 75 mana, right? You're getting like 75 mana, which is going to turn into like, you know, 2 and a change bonus damage. Like, it's not going to be a very, very big deal unless you're building more ability power. But of course, it does mean that every 100 AP you buy is going to give you 75 more mana, 75 more mana, 75 more mana, and 5 more flat damage on this. So it means that the real AP ratio is instead of really up by 5%, so you're getting 5 damage per 100 AP, it's really more like 7.5 damage. And so, you know, it's slightly increased by a bit more. So I guess we could early say it's like more like, 725, something like that. And so it's really a bit more like this. This is probably actually like the slightly more accurate numbers here. I think this is pretty close to accurate. So again, you still need to be on a 3rd AP item. Keep in mind, your Mythic has like 80 Seraphs. If you go Seraphs instead of the other one, I'm blanking on what it's called. Fimbulwinter, that's got like 65 on it. If you get a Void Staff, that's got like 70 on it. Like, we're still not there actually, because we're 80 plus 60 plus 70 is like 210. So like, we kind of need to get to like 4 or 5 items for it to be a buff. So like, Ryze is definitely dealing less damage, but it's definitely being alleviated if you build AP. I spot checked him really quickly in solo queue, just to see like how he was doing. His win rate was like 48% on first item. I haven't seen Ryze be a 48% win rate solo queue champion in ever. Like, actually ever. So, I mean, impressive that every once in a while he's been nudged and nudged and nudged toward being relatively playable in solo queue. Like, that's pretty impressive. But from what I recall, looking at the win rate stuff, yeah, he was doing better with tank builds, and so nudging him back towards AP, I think, should be a bit of a healthier gameplay pattern, because then you can actually kill the guy who's doing all the damage, and that seems pretty positive. Next up is Varus. So Varus is getting 0 to 6 bonus damage on hit. I saw a version of this that was actually more aggressive, but it was walked back to not be too scary. I want to point out that across all ranks, which has its own, like, hey, if you're not in silver, you're not the average player. Like, maybe it's different for you at higher elo, but across all ranks, W max was like 0.5% win rate behind E max second. W second versus E second. So lethality is like barely better than on hit Varus, and on hit Varus is almost as powerful, very close to as powerful. And so like a simple +6 on hit damage is going to do a fair bit to make it more powerful. Now, it's not going to be +6 on hit damage right away, right? You're only getting 1.5 on hit damage at level 8, and then it scales up from there. So it's going to take a little bit to get there, right? But and then you also have 50 to 100 extra damage on the R by end ranks. So here is the data table here. And yeah, again, it takes to level 8 to get there, but again, eventually 6 damage on hit is not bad. If you're going for Rage Blade, of course, you're going to get that. Every third auto is going to apply that as extra damage, so that's going to add up a little bit. And so, a bit more of your damage is going to come from the on hit damage instead of the base AD. Okay, great. As far as the ult damage is concerned, like, it's not nothing, right? The snipe damage is going to matter. It's going to add up. It's going to do something for you. So, cool. Yeah, moderate buffs to Varus. On hit Varus, some late game damage tends to be a bit more solo queue focused. Cool stuff, though. Overall, seems pretty nice. Then the final, there are 2 more changes. One of them is Locket, but the other one is this big set on Zeri. So Zeri is losing 5 base AD. She's doing math changes on her health, growth, and base armor. I forgot to do this change on the zap damage. 3 to 15 becomes 1 to 10. If this was linear, then we were getting 12 over 18 or 17 levels, so about 0.7 per level. This is basically starting 2% lower and then also scaling more slowly and then stopping. And then moving up from 8 to 13. So very, very big early game nerf here, and then obviously still worse up through level 13. And then I'm trying to think, like 13 to 18 is going to be, yeah, that's still 5 levels apart at 0.7 each. So yeah, even at level 13, the damage is still lower. That's definitely going to be true. Just going to be less bad than like 1 through 7. Anyway, so base AD down by 5. Health and armor math, we'll talk about it in a second. Zap damage is down pretty meaningfully, to be honest. Q damage is up by 1 to 5. We'll talk about that in a little bit. E cooldown no longer has a rank up incentive, but E pierce damage certainly does. We're probably still going to be maxing E, but obviously it's a weaker ability. Either at rank 1 it has less pass through, or at max rank it has longer cooldown. And then some stuff to her R. Okay, we'll talk about the R stuff a little bit later. So as far as Zeri's base AD, and that's what it means for her Q damage. So keep in mind that Zeri does not use her base AD for anything except for her Q and Sheen procs. So her base AD is down by 5. Her AD scaling is absolutely trash. I am honestly surprised this change took so long to push through. This seems like the most obvious lever for balancing Sheen versus crit. Obviously, August did a bunch of other stuff in terms of making the Q crit and stuff, and that all kind of worked out. I think there was some crit ratio stuff, I forget, but certainly like there was stuff going on with crit that certainly mattered. Her lightning damage on the ultimate mattering, all that kind of stuff. Like certainly like every patch or two, he's done more levers to change crit versus Sheen to make the builds equally viable and not hard force Trinity Force, which, you know, good. But you know, this is one where I'm surprised that like this was changed before, like this was changed after the Q base damage changes. Anyway, so our base AD is down, which is basically just how much damage does Sheen deal, and it deals 5 less damage. A Triforce deals 10 less damage. That is pretty meaningful. Triforce deals 10 less damage on hit. That is a very, very meaningful Triforce. It also affects how much bonus AD she gets from the threefold strike AD stacking on Triforce. That's also going to be there in the well. So 2 nerfs to Triforce basically here via this change. But then how much damage does her actual Q, you know, the burst fire actually do as a result? Well, down 5 versus +1 is not going to help very much. But once we're here, the actual math here is 0.5 damage. That her total outgoing Q damage is 0.5 damage apart, because she loses 5 AD, she gains 5 base damage, she does 1.1 times her AD plus the base damage. So it is an early game nerf, and to be fair, Zeri is very slightly early game skewed. But then this comes and kicks back in, and then she's pretty much fine again. So very, very, very big fan of these changes. I mean, they're so good and so kind of like elegant that I'm just surprised this wasn't done sooner. Again, not as a diss, but just like this is like, I think the right change, or the most right change I've seen for Zeri. And I'm still a fan of the crit scaling change. I think those were also very, very good changes. I just would have, like, in retrospect, would have put this first in line, but like whatever, right? I don't know why it keeps sounding like I'm complaining. I like this change a lot, is what I want to say, really. Okay, basically, I mean, this is like practically no change in actual damage output, because keep in mind, as soon as you build any AD at all, it's the same number. It's still only 0.5 outgoing damage, except for Trinity Force Pox, which is 10 less outgoing damage. Further exacerbated by threefold strike. Okay, next up, as I said, there was going to be mathy changes to her base durability. So her health is up overall. This is her durability to magic damage is equal level 1, but overall up. So she is much more durable against magic damage. Well, a bit more durable against magic damage. Now it's worth noting that the more health you have, the less bonus health matters, right? So, you know, the comparative durability of Triforce versus crit goes down. The comparative durability of Cleaver versus crit goes down. The comparative durability of Titanic Hydra versus crit goes down, because she's got more of her power in health. This also, of course, directly affects her magic damage durability. As compensation, her armor went down, as you can see here. The math is obviously really, really tight. Simply nerfing her armor by 1 plus 0.5 per level. You end up getting physical damage durabilities of very, very close. If we kill the decimals, you can see that, again, she is very, very much about the same durability, but keep in mind, as soon as you buy any bonus health in this champion, the armor difference takes over, and these numbers turn red yet again. I mean, Doran's Blade itself, by the way, will actually kick this into the negative for everything. I'm pretty sure. Like, if we like, you know, if this becomes, let's just say this is like 992, and this is 1016, this will be, yeah, it'll be under 100%, right? So like, just with Doran's Blade, right, you get there. So just, you know, unless I did the math wrong there, I don't think I did. That's how it works out. Also glad I didn't stop myself, and I was actually right that it was going to turn red, or at least, you know, be sub 100. I guessed. I just happened to be right. So that's good to know. Okay. So yeah, there's the mathy changes, right? Again, less value in building bonus health because she already has a bit more. keep in mind Titanic Hydra itself is a bonus health on hit damage, not a base health or a total health on hit. So this is not actually buffing Titanic Hydra. That's not how the math works out. Okay. And then we have the Zeri E change, right? So the cooldown has been flattened out. So once you're at level 8, the cooldown is longer. Keep in mind the pass-through damage has been nerfed. So even if you get here to 13 where you've maxed it out for the full pierce damage, you still have the lower cooldown. E is definitely a worse ability. Looking at solo queue data, W max is still substantially worse than E max. Arguably, E has even more of a rank up incentive now via the fact that you really, really care about the pass-through damage. Even though the cooldown incentive is not very good, the pass-through damage is really, really worth ranking up for. So W versus E max is definitely, I think, not getting fixed. It doesn't have to be fixed. It's nice to see, what can you max second, but like it's not a requirement. It's not the most important thing in champion design. It's a nice to have, but it's not worth sacrificing any of your other sort of desires. So not a huge deal, not a very big deal, right? So definitely still Emax on Zeri. I'd be shocked if this like changed around somehow, but I don't see why it would. Either way, again, not a huge deal. Just nerfs to Zeri. Okay, great. She's definitely doing too well. So cool beans. And again, the nerfs are, I would say, mostly early game focused. The nerfs here, I would say like here early game focused, and her zap damage right through her passive is early game focused. The final thing is a little bit of change to her R. Basically, if you actually hit champions with an aggressive lightning crash, you're going to get more stacks for move speed and attack speed and whatnot, or just generally speaking move speed. But you're getting less move speed per stack. So basically, instead of getting 6% per champion hit, you're getting 6% per champion hit. So the upfront burst of move speed is identical, but for every stack afterwards, her like scaling to infinity, eventually falls off. I saw a discussion around, is the infinite case of Zeri more frustrating than it is fun? Personally, I believe the infinite case is more fun than frustrating. I realize it can feel bad to have Zeri zip around and just like be a total jerk to you, but I mean, I don't know. To me, it's like that is one thing that is very uniquely Zeri, and to me, I wouldn't want to see it go away because it is quite rare. Sure, it's going to stack up more slowly. I think that's fine, right? But I would feel really, really bad if there were a cap imposed, because then it would make it feel like, oh, I meant to reach the cap. I think it's like basic human nature. There's like we're gonna do a very quick tangent. It's a pretty short rundown. There's a ability in Path of Exile called Tornado, where basically it shows up in the field and it follows enemies around. And what you do is you hit it and it stores damage, and then once it's stored damage, it then deals that damage out. Like the tornado like becomes more powerful because you hit it with your arrows or whatever, right? You shoot some lightning blades into it, you shoot some arrows into it. It charges up the tornado gets more powerful, and the tornado starts like just beating things up. But there's a mechanic with the tornado where the tornado says it absorbs up to 20 hits. And people are like, oh, how do I get 20 hits? And it's like, no. It just stops storing damage after 20 hits. You don't want to get the 20 hits. You want to like deal a bunch of damage over 10 hits. It's like better for slower attacking builds because it's going to store all your damage. Doesn't matter how many times you hit, just like how much damage you can deal is the important part. It just has a cap for really high attack speeds, right? Where like if you would hit it 40 times, it ignores the back half of your damage, where if you hit it 20 times, twice as hard, it uses all of the damage. If you hit it 10 times, 4 times as hard, it stores all of the damage. But human psychology is people see a number, they see a stat cap, they go, oh, I've got to reach the cap, because that's just like intuitive, right? I think that's just the intuition. So I'm glad to see stacks not cap on this ability, because I think it properly... It puts the proper player psychology on what this ability does. Yeah, you just keep hastening up during the fight. You're not meant to reach the cap. And that's why I defend this, I think, a lot. Anyway, yeah, it's gonna ramp more slowly. Okay, whatever, right? And then finally, a very small change to Locket the Iron Solari. The shield is down 30 to 25. Stay tuned. It's really down more like 27 to 25, which is a very minor difference, but technically it's there. And there's 2 less armor and MR on the aura. You're basically down 1 mythic passive as a result, but this is like, your teammates take 1.5% more damage. One thing I noticed, actually, by the way, so people are talking about how overall, like, lethality, not the stat, but like time to kill is short. We're going to say it this way. Overall deathiness is higher in League of Legends than it has been in a while. I don't think it's because damage has been power crept all that hard. I think it has to a certain degree. Items have gotten more efficient over time, but I think over the last like 6 years, that's kind of stopped. I think if you want to compare like 2009 atomization, 2010 atomization, the 2015 atomization, I think there was a massive boost in the power of items as like Riot got better at designing items for classes, where like Veigar's best ability haste item wasn't Nashor's Tooth and Frozen Heart. Like you can go Frozen Heart if you wanted to be tanky, but like I remember doing spotlights for champions like, oh, I really want to get to the cooldown reduction cap. So like on Gangplank, we're going to buy a Frozen Heart 5th. On Veigar, we're going to buy a Nashor's Tooth 4th. Because like stacking CDR is a really, really good offensive stat, but like they didn't have old Morellonomicon or old Athenes or current Cosmic Drive or current Seraph's Embrace with haste on it, right? Like those didn't exist. So like I couldn't build optimally. So that was one thing that I think up to a certain point, you know, I want to say like my cutoff to me is like 2015, 2016 is like when items stopped really getting power crept. Because like people actually found items in the niches roughly. I think Assassins got more stuff, but like other than that, I think we pretty much equaled out for the most part. However, the big thing that changed, and you might already know what I'm talking about because of what item we're hovering on, is Aegis of the Legion / Runic Bulwark disappeared. We stopped being at a point where junglers were hard supports who rushed aura defensive items every game, so they weren't damage threats, and they gave everyone 30 armor and magic resist. And then suddenly, no one died very fast anymore, right? And that was the pro meta game that influenced high elo a ton. Sure, there are a lot of solo queue players who like hopped off and just did whatever and played their damage champions, but there were a large portion of games where just everyone had 30 armor and magic resist. Turns out people die a lot slower when your jungler doesn't build damage items and gives everyone 30 armor and magic resist. There's one fewer damage threat and everyone's 20% more durable. That, I think, was the thing that led to this like damage creep that people talk about. Because I think you could go back and try to measure it, and I'll bet you there's not that much damage creep. I actually believe that. I think it's losing Runic Bulwark, which at the time made a lot of sense because guess what? Like, you know, champions are what am I trying to say? Sorry about this one. Yeah, I mean, people just like lost access to that, right? And then there was a very small one, which was about 2 years ago when Stat Shards came out, where there was a big project where champions got compensated a bunch of base damages. They got a bunch of bonus ability power, like through like, oh yeah, if you run domination or sorcery or whatever, you get some stats for it. And like that ended up turning into more stats on champions that ended up being mostly offensive stats on champions because in the like 2017 Masteries meta, like the correct play was to run the tanky tree at the end. It was to run, you know, you'd run your precision tree or whatever, or, you know, cunning or whatever. And then like every pro player basically would run the resolve tree. They would all run resolve. They would get scars or whatever, and they would get bonus health and they get some bonus armor and MR. Like they actually all did that. That was like the way more common build. And it was the way better build as well. Like it was absolutely correct. This is absolutely what you should do. And then like we go into this version of runes, right? We go into Runes Reforged, and everyone just like forgets that the defensive options are the best, and they're just like, nope, we're gonna run Ravenous Hunter, we're gonna run, like Electrocute. Well, I mean, Ravenous Hunter has some sustain, sure, but like, you know, we're gonna run Sudden Impact, we're gonna run Cheap Shot, we're gonna run Scorch, we're gonna run all this damage stuff, and for our second stat shard, we're of course always gonna run Ability Power. We're never gonna run Armor and MR. And like, if you look at the data, Conditioning is like the best rune in the game. Like if you pick one rune to force onto every single champion and you don't get to choose anymore, it's just Conditioning. It's just like the best overall rune in the game. Pretty much every AD carry I have spot checked, Conditioning is the optimal rune in your second page. Like screw Cheap Shot, forget Ravenous Hunter, forget all that stuff, Conditioning. So that's just like a thing I want to point out that I have noticed to be true. And probably why this sort of idea of damage creep exists is because junglers deal damage now, and Aura, Armor, MR doesn't exist anymore. So we found our final tangent on a thing for this patch rundown. We had to make good on the last one. It was under 30 minutes. That was just not acceptable. Alrighty, 12.5 micro patch TLDR. Aphelios loses 2 armor and 20 base health, an early game skewed nerf. It's about 5% more physical damage taken in the early game, or 5% less physical durability. Ultimately kind of the same thing. Definitely, more meaningful in the early game. It's like 1 to 2% durability in the late game, not a very big of a deal, but an early then focused nerf that helps you maybe all in the guy and kill him. Also keep in mind, armor nerfs will play into sustain, since you are taking more damage per hit and sustaining the same amount of health back per hit, so can't sustain through things quite as easily if it was just a base health nerf. Than if it was just base health nerf. Ashe gets very quickly a cheaper mana cost on W, and up until the very end of the game, a lower cooldown on R. This is a very big deal. I think this will turn a lot of heads. I don't think it's like that much power, but it will do a lot to raise the interest in playing Ashe. Should be pretty good. Draven gets 2 base AD. Seems pretty good. Small buff there. Jinx gets a 4 mana more expensive Fishbones and 20 less range early game. I think it's going to be pretty meaningful. It will hurt her early lane phase a bit. It won't kick her out of pro, but it will... it'll lower her first pick priority. I think she's still completely playable. She's still going to be strong, but I think this is actually a well-sized nerf. The question is, will pros adapt? Because I don't believe Jinx, with these changes, is the best AD carry in the game. But it's up to pros to decide they want to learn new comps, because Jinx will still be playable. She will still be fine. She will still be viable. And if teams are like, well, we already know how to play Jinx comps, whatever, we'll just keep doing it, they can, and it won't be horrible. It won't be like bad to play Jinx. But there probably is something else they could pick. Will they is the question. Lucian gets quite a lot here. Gets 0.6 AD growth, which is about 10 AD at level 18, and a 10% total AD ratio bump to the passive damage. That is definitely meaningful. That is a really, really big damage amp to his damage when buffed by a teammate. This is a very big deal. I think Lucian's going to be in a really good spot post-patch. Master Yi gets some of his hotfix nerfs reverted, so he should be pretty playable. Ryze gets 5 to 25 damage taken off of his Q. TLDR, you need about 350 mana to equalize this damage loss. 350 ability power to equalize this damage loss. That means you're probably going to be on 4 items as Ryze. Unless your third item is Death Cap, then it's 3 items as Ryze. But of course, that means you're not playing Fimble Winter Tank, so that matters. Otherwise, a nerf to Tank Ryze. Not a huge nerf, though it is a nerf to AP Ryze. Because you still have to get to 3 items or 4 items, and up until that point, you are definitively weaker. So sorry, Ryze, you are definitely losing win rate. Your tank build is just losing more. Varus gains 0 to 6 on hit damage on W if he maxes it. W max second Varus is 0.5% win rate behind E max second Varus, so a small nudge makes this build as viable. Obviously, the flat buff of your R doing a bit more damage is going to put Varus in a pretty decent spot. I will say, though, he is pretty weak overall. So looking at it puts him as like 2.5 to 3% win rate below the average bot laner. So he appears to be very, very, very weak for solo queue. Wouldn't have mind seeing, scaling focus buff, which to be fair, right, rank 2 and rank 3 R is. More of the later W stuff is going to be somewhat as well, so seems decent. Maybe it's going to be okay. Zeri gets a pretty big set of changes. TLDR, 24 deals 10 less damage, but her overall Q damage is identical, or functionally identical, from level 9 onward. Zap does substantially less damage, or sorry, the basic attack Zap does substantially less damage. She is overall more durable against magic damage, the same durability against physical damage, unless she also buys health, aka Trinity Force Satanic Hydra, in which case she's going to be less durable against physical damage. So always more tanky against magic, equal or less against Fizz, depending on if it's a crit or bruiser build. Seems pretty reasonable there. 90 health growth is a pretty reasonable health growth, keep in mind. E cooldown is getting flattened, but the pierce damage is down. So basically, much less early game power through E as well. But the rank incentive is still there. But yep. And then finally, same amount of move speed per champion hit, ultimately, but slower ramping in a team fight. And then finally, Locket of the Iron Solari is getting a 2 armor and MR nerf. And I recommend, if you want to hear this tangent, you go back and click the timestamp for Locket. But ultimately, the synopsis I want to go over and just very quickly is I think a lot of the reason people perceive there is a damage creep in the game is because junglers are no longer building Aegis of the Legion / Runic Bulwark, which meant they weren't building tanky. They can build damage now instead, and the armor no longer has a bunch of bonus armor and MR to the rest of the team, which made everyone more durable. That item, I think, is single-handedly what turned into damage creep. That whole thing going away is what turned into damage creep being a thing. It was a big defensive item that could be easily bought that made your whole team very, very tanky. That doesn't exist in the game anymore. Thanks for watching the patch rundown. See you next time. Bye-bye. Also, by the way, I'm streaming almost every day on my Twitch channel. I'm streaming Lost Ark. That might not be for everyone, but hey, by the way, I'm streaming a lot right now. So see ya.